talking recently, and Tawni, you said that Silicon Valley is not a place anymore. What is it?
Yeah, I think it's not just a place. I think if you look back in, the 1980s to early 2000s, it was proximity was a necessity to power and to access and to success in building a startup. And now I think that that access, at least to capital, has been quite democratized. And I think that talent and access to talent, in global talent in particular, is flattening a bit. I don't think it's all the way there. And I think that AI infrastructure is the new geography. If that, that was what I meant when I said that.
Yeah. There's a lot to unpack there, not to use the cliche, but I'm like, I have questions, but I want to hear what you two have to think as well.
Yeah, well, great. It's awesome to be here. It's really exciting to be in this audience, and you always are super excited to have the first panel after lunch. So we're thrilled to do that. But I think the idea of Silicon Valley's dominance is it's incredibly critical to this industry. It's like trying to access financial markets without New York or London. Like we need Silicon Valley. But I think, as Tawni was saying, that there's a lot of systems that were dependent on physically being here that have now been disaggregated. And I think the most exciting and the most necessary is probably capital. That's pretty nicely ensconced here, but access is happening all around the country. Entrepreneurship is obviously happening all around the country, all around the world. And I think that there are lots of other systems that would be great to talk about that are getting much more diversified across geographies outside of the Bay Area.
So I have a different perspective. I'm French. I moved here 18 months ago. And before that, I was the VP growth of a great European company that crossed 400 million of revenue. And after that, I felt like I really want to be the global company. So I really wanted to do Y Combinator from day one. I wanted to move here. I think there's so much more knowledge here. In terms of product, in terms of go-to-market, in terms of also peer pressure about making something big. I think the same founder in another environment might not do as well as in Silicon Valley. So I really think it was important. That being said, I think sometimes there's a lot of noise in Silicon Valley as well. It's easy to get lost. There's a war for talent, there's a war for deals to sell. It's very competitive. So it's not a magic formula, but I really feel like to put all the chances on our side, we had to move here.
And Anh-Tho, what was it that made you decide to finally move to Silicon Valley?
So we waited until we had product market fit, and we raised a Series A before moving. So we started crafting the product from Paris. I think there's a great engineering talent in Europe, and we managed to go back and forth to SF. But I was very intentional about building the cap table with US investors and not only European investors, because I think they also bring knowledge and network that is super important.
Yeah. And David, you specifically invest in companies that are from not San Francisco, New York, or Boston. Could you talk a bit more about why you take that approach?
Yeah, sure. So our fund is called Rise of the Rest. It was started about a decade or so ago. We really saw some really great entrepreneurial stories happening in places like Detroit, in Nashville, in Cincinnati, in Atlanta, Chicago. None of these are small cities, right? But these markets that most of them have big research universities, most of them have access to significant amount of corporate talent. But the big thing that they've been lacking historically is early stage capital, and that's the kind of capital that it takes to allow for an undergrad coming out of Michigan to say, I'm going to stay in Ann Arbor or Detroit and build here. It's the kind of capital that convinces somebody who's working in brand management at Procter & Gamble in Cincinnati to say, I want to actually start a new brand. I want to start an e-com D2C brand, and I've got all the know-how, having worked on Tide or Purina or one of these other brands, to actually do it on my own. And so we saw that this was happening. And we were doing this at the same time as, cloud computing was starting to wave, at the same time through the pandemic, where remote was becoming a much more viable option. And it was just sort of this opportunistic unlock that said there's this great wedge of seed capital because as the data shows that the valuations start to plateau around Series B, Series C, and that's about the same time that a lot of our Silicon Valley competitors would jump on a plane and come visit you out in Atlanta. So we saw this opportunity to say, let's find a little wedge and find some of these great startups in the middle of the country that we have a slight competitive edge at being able to get into, and then watch them and participate with them as they continue to grow.
And Tawni, what's your approach with geography and fundraising, or investing?
I think that you want to build where you are going to be able to really augment your superpowers. And so I think that if you're in an area where you're really trying to build fast and to have access to some of the best talent, that can mean that you need to be in Silicon Valley. Right, when you look at the growth of, formerly FANG, now Magnus companies, they're growing rapidly. A lot of those engineers and product leaders come out, and startups often fail because they don't have experienced technical talent. And so your first 15 hires matter so much. They're deterministic in the future probability of your success. And so having access to that matters. Being able to move fast, that hasn't changed, right? Like the velocity. What I think Silicon Valley brings is it's an operating model, it's a system, and that whether or not you are building in Silicon Valley or not, you having that mindset and adopting that operating model, I think still matters in the success of the business that you're building.
Can we unpack that? Because I think the three things that Silicon Valley does better than any other place in the world is they are able to, the folks in this community are able to evaluate and underwrite risk better than anybody else in the world. They're able to create, sometimes false, but significant urgency of the innovators, right? You must get this done by a certain time. And there's just such a consistent magnet for talent, global talent, to come here and try. And I think that it's possible to replicate that in smaller scales in other communities around the globe, around the country. But I think this is the epicenter of, in my opinion, those three things which formulate the operating system that you were talking about.
Yeah. No, I mean, oh, go ahead, please, Anh-Tho.
You asked a question, when did we choose to move? And I think when you start a company, it's already so hard to build a product, build a team, raise like capital, that I wouldn't say like people who are not in the Silicon Valley should move, because our first hires were like people we knew like very well. And I think they are magic hires. They are not the obvious choices, but like they understand us and there's a big fit and we can like find product market fit together. And whereas like moving straight away and adding like uncertainty, like other dimensions and over like they focusing on admin, getting a visa, all that is pretty daunting for pre-seed companies. So from our perspective, we think like moving was the best decision, but like we did it at the right time. Moving like on day one would have been a little bit too much, I would say.
What has surprised you most since you moved here?
I think the level of hustle and of ambition. I always say, so sometimes when I go back to Paris, I love Paris so much, but it's like, it seems like a village. Like, it's so small. Like, here people think in terms of, oh, the US market is so big already. So, and people think about like how to build a $10 billion company. I think in Europe sometimes like having a 30 million like exit is great. I mean, it's still good, but here like the level of ambition is so different.
Something I personally think about a lot since I live in Philadelphia, which is notably not San Francisco. So the people that I talk to just on a regular basis, sometimes I'll be like, oh my God, like Linda Yaccarino stepped down. And then people are like, I have no idea what you're talking about. I have no idea who that is. But sometimes it is actually helpful to get a perspective on what people who aren't so embedded in the tech industry actually care about. So I wonder if there's ever an advantage to being not in such a highly concentrated tech hub for getting a sense of how the general public would react or use your product.
Yeah, I mean, we've got a number of portfolio companies. I got 200 portfolio companies spread in 100 different cities around the country. And you know, we have this term at our place called founder market geography fit, right? So it's founder market fit, but then there's often geography that is a very critical component to the evolution of the industry. Let me give you an example. Healthcare is one thing that's been hyper-regionalized. There are brand names like Cleveland Clinic and MD Anderson and Mayo Clinic that aren't in the Bay Area, but like are driving forces in healthcare. But if you think about things like the mortgage industry, so much of mortgage tech goes through Columbus, Ohio. So much of fintech ops go through Tampa Bay, the Tampa Bay region. Like there are these little pockets of industry that have been, subdivided across the country that create this really cool opportunity for entrepreneurship to happen, right? It's a guy working or a gal working at a big mortgage company that's like, I could do this better on my own, or there's technology that I've developed here that I could extract and make it interesting. And so I think that there is often sometimes something unique about the place and the community and the ecosystem that enables next generation, next level entrepreneurship.
Yeah. I mean, when I really started to think about the question that you asked us, Amanda, it was really more about not whether or not founders need Silicon Valley, but what parts of Silicon Valley are essential still today, and what parts have we learned to make them portable. Much to what you're saying, we also are investors in healthcare. It's very regionalized. It would not make sense for those sales teams or those customer success teams to build here in San Francisco, for instance. You want to be where your customers are. You were speaking of that, Anh-Tho, very much so. So I think it is very much around the strategic advantage to Silicon Valley that still lives to be true is having network density, and I think that matters, and access to network density matters a ton. I think access to incredible talent and access to experienced operators that can help you to stand up an extraordinary culture.
To add on what you both said, I think when you build B2C, for instance, there's less impetus to move to the Silicon Valley. But for B2B, I think in a lot of parts of the world, I don't know so much about the US to be honest, but like the mid-market segment in B2B doesn't really exist in Europe, for instance. So when you do B2B and you start like selling to mid-market, like you need to move to the US. Then you can move back, like when you're like enterprise ready, I would say. But yeah, I think B2C and B2B are really different.
Mm-hmm. And how do you approach staffing and hiring, which, like, you're here, but where's the rest of your team? And are you trying to hire just in the area or globally?
So we started during COVID, so we're remote first. I love the office. I would love to do an only in-office company, but it's kind of too late, so we're like continuing in the remote mode. So most of the engineering team is in Europe. We're also building out an engineering team more on the US time zone. We're hiring go-to-market teams like on both sides of the Atlantic. I think it's really important to have salespeople who also know about the local culture, whether it's European or like American.
The advice we typically give our portfolio companies is to kind of be where you need to be, right? Because it's easy to say to a college graduate, you need to relocate, but if you're talking to a seasoned entrepreneur who, for whom, they've got a family, they've got a mortgage, they got kids, they've got all this other stuff, it's hard to say pick up and move to the Bay Area. But the talent piece does become hard, right? And I think, as you're thinking about recruiting, maybe not your first couple of hires that you could probably source locally, but when you start to really ramp up, like you might need to get a chief revenue officer or a head of marketing that either is virtual and remote or start to build a new cluster in another market. Like you head of sales in Chicago is great because half the country is a half-day flight away, right? So like there's opportunities to start to build those clusters around good talent while still kind of keeping your HQ in a market that is either affordable or has some family legacy for you.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I would say that, I think post the pandemic, hybrid is here to stay, is what I would say. And I think that each company needs to really think through their organizational design, the phase of growth they're in. If you're a seed stage company and you have 9 people, it is a tax to have everybody distributed. You can build arguably faster by being able to be concentrated in a room. That being said, as you get to your sort of Series B, Series C, you have to start thinking about your mobility strategy and your hubs and spokes and how you're going to concentrate the right sets of talent together And I think that many companies that experienced hypergrowth in the past few years are asking themselves that question, how do I make hybrid work in a market where many teams need to be together to do their very best work?
And David, when I was researching Rise of the Rest, I saw a speech you gave a few years ago, so the statistic might be different now, but you said that of hundreds of companies that Rise of the Rest has invested in, about 44% are founders who are either women or people of color. And I'm curious what you think, like, what sorts of benefits are you reaping from that about being able to reach founders that you might not have otherwise been able to reach?
Yeah, look, I think the reality is, if, there's more black people proportionately in Atlanta than there is in a lot of other cities. And so I think when you go to Atlanta and you start looking for founders, like the lived experience and the opportunity to find those types of founders there, it's important. I think the comment I just made about sort of the ability for particularly women and people of color to be where they are, right? The first amount of friends and family is like, your mother-in-law watching your kid for a night so you can fly to San Francisco for a couple of days. That's an investment in building the business. And I think that those entrepreneurs, it's harder for them to pick up and build deep here. And so one of the things that we've tried to lean into as investors is how can we see the entrepreneur for a full person and recognize that the biggest opportunity for us to have a successful outcome is for that entrepreneur, that founder, to be well-grounded and able to give it 100% of their time and start to replicate some of that urgency that Anh-Tho was talking about in their market, because they've got a stable family life. Like those kind of things are actually important, particularly for more mature startup founders. But yeah, we're excited about our ability to see opportunity first through the lens of geography, but then also that opens up other lenses of other types of diversity that we're able to also find and invest in.
I was also wondering if you think cost of living factors into this at all, which if you have funding, then you probably can figure it out. But if you're haven't raised any funding, coming to San Francisco to try to build your company, it's more expensive than a lot of places in the country.
Yeah, look, if you want a real estate option and you're looking for some Class B office space, it's a hell of a lot cheaper in Columbus, Ohio, than it is down in off Market Street here. But look, I think that the cost of living argument is one that is going to be hard to engage in for the long term. I think it really starts to hinge on access to talent and I think the thing that we should also acknowledge is a lot of these ecosystems over the last 10, 15 years have really invested in building and buttressing those entrepreneurs, because they're seeing the big employers start to die off in their company or in their regions. And so I think that policymakers, mayors, city leaders are starting to say, hey, we need some of these tech jobs because they're a much better source of employment for their citizens, for their constituents than another restaurant or whatever. And so I think that we're seeing this opportunity of bringing in more talent and making the life better in a place like Bentonville, Arkansas, or Tampa Bay, Florida, where there's more stuff to do, and you're seeing the ecosystem evolve. It used to be, when you think about places like Soho in New York City, the artists were the ones called to sort of gentrify communities. But now you start to look at a lot of communities now, and it's the entrepreneurs. It's like people want the startups, because with the startups come the coffee shops and the new restaurants and the engaging things for mostly young, upwardly mobile people to do. And so it really is exciting to see how investments, both public and private investments in the entrepreneurial ecosystem, can feed and refurbish communities. So I think that cost of living thing is starting to blossom into bigger, more fruitful conversations, policy conversations about the goal of entrepreneurship.
Mm-hmm. I think everything you're saying is, I'm aligned with what you're saying. I think the challenge is that there's a gravitational pull right now with AI to pull it back to Silicon Valley. Yeah. Really talented people want to work with other talented people. They want to work for mission and purpose and be at the center. I mean, we're arguably in one of the most transformative periods of innovation, at least in my lifetime. And if you're a talented person and you want to be building a company, you want to be close to that, right? It used to be about being just the proximity around physical hardware and needing to have access and maybe to some of those talent communities. And I do think that with AI infrastructure, having access to compute and models and differentiated data sets matter, but at some point, that playing field will be leveled to what you're saying, right? Like you'll be able to have that, it's a digital infrastructure. But I think that the network density, the ability to make first introductions to customers, to design partners, to being able to get rapid customer feedback, I think that still is true, and I think that there's a gravitational force that is pulling that back to the valley right now.
Mm-hmm.
Also, sorry, I think about cost of living. Like, it's expensive to be here for sure, but there's so much access to capital as well. So more funding, valuations are higher, sales contracts are also higher. So everything's bigger. Like when I was a kid, I was saying everything's bigger in America. But I still think it's true for startups as well.
Look, if you do not live in the Bay Area, you need to know the best flight to get here if you want to build a venture-backable startup.
That's exactly right.
Like I think that the networks are too strong here. I think that the opportunity set is great here. I think you can live in Atlanta, you can live in St. Louis, but I think if you want to build here, you have to be connected here so that when you come and spend 3 or 4 days, your days are full of coming to TechCrunch Disrupt, and then meeting with a couple of investors, and then talking to some customers, and then interviewing a couple of people that you think might be, like that's got to be your schedule if you want to build a tech company and you're not based here, because those networks are dynamic and fluid and strong, and there's such a strong sense of network density here. But I think you can go home too, right? Like I think that is really part of the cool thing about the world in which we're living. And I think that AI, like, as much as there is such a strong gravitational pull here, there's a kid right now in her bedroom building an AI startup that's going to be a brand name that we're all going to know about in a couple of years, and she may live somewhere that's not here, and it's entirely possible and plausible, more so than ever in the era of technology, for her to be able to do that, build that billion-dollar company with handful of employees.
Yeah, I mean, if there's one takeaway or positive thing that I think that we've adopted from the pandemic, it's the intentionality of building network and connection. And when you think about what is going to make a startup successful today, is not necessarily its zip code, to your point. It's much more about their ability to tap in to the talent and capabilities that they need to build, to adopt, I think, the right operating system, not mimicking one of the FANG companies. It's making it your own. What I say is, if you look at the very best companies that you and I admire, it's not just what they built, it's the way they built it. And your job as a founder is to define the society that you are inviting people to come and build with you. And I think that you can do that in any zip code, but you need to be mindful and be very smart about how you adopt the operating system of Silicon Valley and have the compounded learning, the compounded network effects, I think, of being part of it.
Mm-hmm. We have probably about 5 minutes until we'll open for questions, but before we get to that, I wanted to go back to what you said at the beginning, Tawni, about AI, and dig a bit more into how has AI changed how you would answer a question like, do startups still need Silicon Valley?
Yeah, I mean, I think to what David was saying is, you see startups now being able to access learning models, right? Like all the compute power that they need, the unique data sets, and they are able to stand up an AI, native startup much faster and regardless of location, right? So I think you get from, call it 0 to 0.25 much faster regardless of where you are. You have a really compelling problem that you're trying to solve. You have the ambition and the motivation and probably a great co-founder or someone else that you're building, much like what you were speaking to, Anh-Tho, and you get to that proof point. But I think beyond that, there is so much more that you need.
I think go ahead, please.
I still think a lot of answers are like tribal knowledge here.
Yeah.
Like, here you can find someone who experimented a similar problem. Like for any of your problem at your startup, you think you're quite unique because we're like this as founders, but like everybody experimented a similar problem. And usually it's not always written in an article. It goes through recommendations, word of mouth, the network. I still think this is happening here. It's an in-person thing, though.
I think that one of the consequences of AI will be a little bit of a greater barbelling of the financing. So for venture capital access, I think that you'll see more seed funds standing up and supporting a lot of the AI opportunities. And then because of the efficiency, both the engineering and go-to-market efficiency that's enabled through AI, you'll see less of them going out to raise that traditional Series A and more either, self-financing through revenue or bootstrapping a little bit longer and then trying to go raise, the monster Series B is the new black, right? I think it's like, can you skip Series A and go straight to Series B because you're able, the first thing that many of my companies would do after raising the Series A is go out and hire a stable of engineers. And it seems like they're able to do a lot more with a lot less. And so the need, if seed was about MVP creation and engineering sales and go-to-market was all about Series A, AI is enabling those founders to often compress that and sometimes even skip that and go straight onto the $100 million Series B financing.
So let's move on to audience questions. I see we already have somebody at the microphone, but please, anyone, please come up and just stand in line. Try to keep it brief just in case the line grows. And yeah, we'll start with you.
Hi, thanks. I have East Coast background, so basically I have no connections here, but I'm a startup founder, so I thought, it's probably a good idea to be here. I was in the process of either moving to Miami Beach, to have, Ocean View condo, start my company there, or somewhere around here, quality of life probably lower and that's expensive. But I highly agree that probably I can find better team here. If I do move here, but how specifically do you suggest that I reach out to people to find highly qualified candidates for either co-founders or early employees? What's the venue, the channel that realistically works best for founders?
Yeah, I think working with obviously venture firms is great with events and different types of developer communities that you can get involved in. Like the biggest thing I would say is getting really involved in events and creating natural communities for things that you're trying to solve for. So if you're trying to solve for finding a co-founder, talking to other people that have tried to solve for that, like Anh-Tho was saying, it's not a first-time problem. It's a problem that lots and lots of people have experienced. And so speaking to people who've experienced that and developing a network of founders who can share their journey and share about what they did right, what they would change, what they would do if they had to do it again, I think is a really great way it's the compounding learning that I think that you get access to.
Okay, exposure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hey all, thank you for your great insights. I have a comment and a question from there. So right now I'm in Ann Arbor, Michigan. I was at Penn State, so State College, and had my startup there, and it was extremely tough to get out of that college sphere and do anything bigger with it. And now as an early career professional, 2 years into my job, I'm again considering, I'm still in a college town, so I want to go out of that and find the right place for me, also a founder. So one of the things that I have as a concern or a question, there are certain domains that are more prevalent in certain cities. Like I want to build in psychiatry and in healthcare, and there's more concentration of that in the East Coast in certain fields as opposed to the West Coast. But it feels like all the funding and the trade secrets, they lie over here in the Bay. And I feel like I don't know how to make a decision like that, barring the cost, like outside of just that. So what insight do you have? One last quick thing I'll add is sometimes it feels like this is like a bubble of its own, and it's kind of disconnected from what's happening in the rest of the world. So how do we balance that? What's your opinion?
I really empathize with that comment, right? Like, I think that, I think the other piece for founders, and I'm just curious, I mean, if I can ask, how many people are from not the Bay Area?
Yeah.
All right, so this is for many of you guys and ladies, like, it's a steeper hill, right? Like, you have a harder job to climb to get both the attention to the previous question asker, just to like be better networked here. It is a harder skill, and you're doing it as as a visitor effectively. So like, I wouldn't like discount that opportunity. But I think you said something really, like, the capital, though, once it's invested or once it's wired, is highly portable, right? The access to the things that you need to build your business around mental health that might be better geographically located in the East Coast, or, I think that's harder to replicate, that, that cutting edge innovation that's happening in your field, right? If you were in music, I would say maybe Nashville is where the cutting edge innovation, so like, I think that there is still regionalism around cutting edge innovation. I think, like, just like big tech is epicentered here, I think some of the big innovation is epicentered here, and I think that to be able to tap into that is what's required. And so, like I said, like, you're gonna be a frequent flyer on American or United or something, but like, I think that's my advice to you would be where the cutting edge is happening. And if for your industry it's not here, that's okay. But just acknowledge the fact that it's gonna, you're gonna have to create linkages, strong linkages that require, fertilization consistently by you and your team, so that you have that you get the value of what's happening inside the bubble here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and to add, I mean, we have hundreds of companies that we're invested in and a huge healthcare portfolio, and most of that portfolio does not sit here in Silicon Valley. So let me encourage you to say that you can build where the innovation, where the right place for you to build matters. What I would say is that it becomes even more important with capital is democratized if it's portable now and much more accessible regardless of where you are. I think what becomes important is that smart capital is still scarce. And so finding the right venture partner for you, people who are not just going to invest passively and be a passive check, but have active networks in the space and sector that you're looking to build. You can co-opt the benefits of your venture partner by having the right investors on your cap table.
Okay, thank
Hi.
you. Let's, yeah.
Okay. Great. I was curious, probably to David and Tawni, to pick your brain on what do you think, do we need Silicon Valley for its talent as well? Because you mentioned that we need it for the significant urgency, hustling, ambitious, and being like motivated from the people here. But what about talent? If we're seeing, because whenever you invest in a company, I mean, yeah, you invest as well in the team and founders. So what do you think in general in your portfolio, where does that talent come from? Does it always come from here or no?
No, I mean, I think, right, technical talent oftentimes has done let's call it a tour of duty at a company that was rooted in Silicon Valley. That oftentimes is true. It's not always true, but it is true. But I think many founders are domain experts in the problem that they're solving. They found something that they were deeply passionate about, and then they are able to attract incredibly talented people. Inherently, technical talent likes to work on really incredibly hard problems with other talented people. And so there tends to be pockets or pods or a following, right, of talent. And so that certainly does have value here. That being said, I think what maybe a secondary benefit of the pandemic is that we've become much more astute at knowing when to be able to use sort of offshore engineering and offshore resources to be able to integrate into our build, especially in the early years, right? Like, velocity does matter, and keeping your burn down matters a lot. And so being really creative and having access to sometimes maybe more talented people than would move to wherever you are in the country is a benefit to remote, right? Like, that's a true benefit. It's a tax, but it's a benefit.
Okay, cool. What about you, David? Do you
Yeah.
think we need Silicon Valley for its talent?
Yeah,
I actually, we have 5 minutes left, so maybe there's 3 more people waiting. So not to cut you both off, I want to make sure they get their questions answered. Thank you.
Hello, I'm a B2C startup on the East Coast, and I feel a lot of the advice that you've been giving is about startups that are already fully or funded or have already been gotten some financial, some checks. So for funds, for all of the startups, a lot of the meetings I've heard in the past day and today, I hear the word warm intros a lot. You need all those warm intros, you need all those connections, all those ways of connecting with VCs just to even get into the door, to even get that first check. So I understand all the advice that you're giving sounds great for or already maybe somewhat partially pre-seeded funded startups, but what about the ones that aren't funded yet? And how can you grow or develop outside of the Valley without having sort of a backlog of those connections already in place?
Yeah. I think warm intro is like double opt-in intros is like really a Silicon. It's around the world, but it's a Silicon Valley thing because there's like social capital. So when you make an intro, you tell the other person, this person is interesting, it's worth your time. So we need to use it wisely. I would say if you don't have any network, that like joining accelerators and things like this, but there's also like, I love writing content. I think the first customers and even like hires we had were like brought out with our content, the content we publish, we were featured on Hacker News, that kind of things. And we didn't have any network in this area. We didn't even know what Hacker News was at the time, for instance. So I think it's more about like finding what makes you special, what you like, what you enjoy doing, and it can be content, can be tweeting, can be events, it can be sports. People love sports here. And there's like different ways to meet people.
My quick piece of advice, there's like almost every major city has at least a couple of funds, and that would be my first onboarding to getting these warm introductions, right? Either Nora Mosley Ventures in Atlanta will invest, or maybe one of their partners would introduce me to somebody else in their network that would start, like it's you know, it's this networking flywheel, and once you start, and I would start locally because it's just easier, like start having those conversations and see if they germinate into something, you know, into the types of introductions that you're able to start closing.
Cool. Yeah, we'll stay on this side and then come to this side.
Hi, my name is Shazad. I'm from a venture capital firm in emerging markets. I just wanted to get your perspective on emerging markets around the world. And then one of the things I've noticed, something I'm working on myself is like finding the working operating system around the world that will help to elevate the emerging markets. And Silicon Valley has been one of the, the leading forces. So my question is, if you can share your perspective, number one, on the emerging markets, and number two, what are the things should either VCs or the players of ecosystem in emerging markets try to avoid to copy paste in their markets, and things they should really focus on, taken from the example of Silicon Valley? Thank you.
You can go ahead. I had a hard time hearing the question.
Yeah, like I invest in the U.S., so my emerging market is from Detroit down to Dallas, from St. Louis over to Denver. Like that's a big emerging market in and of itself. But I think it is replicating the best of the network density of the Bay Area, right? Bringing the capital, the corporate know-how, the innovators in university or in research-oriented companies, bringing them together as frequently as possible, like a gathering like this that brings all of those people together, I think is the first step. But I think the capital drives it. The corporates kind of give a lot of air cover and customer reference points. But I think that's the flywheel, and I think finding the public support for the ability to start making those investments in the little I infrastructure that enables an innovation ecosystem to flourish is where I would start.
I think, so I've worked on mobile money in Africa, and I also invested in like African startups. So it's very tough for them to raise in general, like especially after Series B. So there are fewer investors in emerging markets in general, but I think they are all more or less connected here. So I would say fewer ones in terms of percentages, but they are also here. And what they like is the ambition, I would say. They still want to have a $10 billion company, so they want the CEO to have this ambition and to really soak in like this methods, learnings, etc., I think.
We are just about out of time, but I don't want to leave you hanging, so maybe we could do like quick fire question.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. So my name's Nick. I'm building a startup in Philadelphia, so thanks. Good to see Philly on the stage. So I'm part of a lot of different groups there, and that's the big question is, okay, if you get successful, like, are you staying here? So I was just curious about the VC kind of to ecosystem connection. Like, is there that kind of feedback loop to kind of keep talent clustered in, especially if you're investing with certain companies within a certain city and working with the ecosystem builders there to kind of keep people in those cities rather than have us have to go out to Silicon Valley if we do get successful?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like I said earlier, most teams are highly distributed at this point. I think the key part is being very thoughtful and intentional about what you're going to build locally in your hub, and then what would you actually be more effective in building elsewhere. And so, I have a startup that's in New York right now. They've achieved, close to 80 million in revenue, so clearly they're successful. And have incredible traction, but they're finding that access to technical talent now has become a headwind. And so they are opening up a San Francisco office. But I think it's that you're not solving every problem from the beginning. It's what are the sets of problems and organizational design and access to talent and network that I need for this phase of growth? And then having the courage and maybe the foresight to rapidly evolve your organization as you go through the various phases of growth.
All right, we got to get off stage,
Thanks.
but thank you so much to the audience and our panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.